So today I'm going to talk about signage and awnings in Kansas Main Street. I know a few of you have probably seen a longer version of this presentation, and I apologize for that, but it's always a good reminder when we're thinking about signage and design on Main Street. So don't just think of it as a refresher. Um, I'll mention that a lot of this text was adapted from a document from Main Street America. It's an old one, but a good one, dated 1995, but it's called Keeping Up Appearances. And I'll show you um, what that document looks like at the end of my presentation. And also you guys can reach out to me and I can send you a PDF of that document. Um, but, you know, one of the things I always say when we talk about signs on Main Street is basically stand back and look at your building and question what the purpose of your sign is for. Is it just merely to identify the business, or does it convey the personality of your business? Um, Also, it's necessary to provide information sometimes about what your business is. Maybe it's not self-evident in the name. So, what kind of customers are you trying to attract? That will also be a part of, designing a complete sign package. And is the sign meant to be read by pedestrians? Is it meant to be read by motorists as well? Or both. And sometimes we need um, different signs to basically communicate to those different Main Street users, the pedestrian and the motorist. A lot of times I would say it takes as many as three different signs on a business to appropriately convey all the information you need to convey. When we think about signs, we kind of break them down into four categories. The most common of which is a word sign, like on the upper left. I always like a good symbol sign, like the one for this optometrist on the upper right, just a set of spectacles. You immediately know what that business is. Number signs are usually most appropriate for, your street address. We always want to have our street address on the building. And then combination signs like the lower right. This is in Minturn, Colorado. Fishing guide business. They have a combination sign, which is both a word sign and a symbol sign, and also happens to be a nice neon sign as well. Consider the possibilities of using different materials. Some of the materials that are commonly used for signs are wood, stone, metal, canvas, awning, paint on glass. Vinyl on glass is probably one of the most common kinds of signs these days. More traditional and often seen on banks would be gold leaf on glass. Um, Etched or stained glass signs sometimes show up, and also plastic signs, but both wood and plastic signs. There's a couple asterisks that, there's cautions about using those materials, and we'll go over those. So wood signs can be a problem on Main Street. They're less durable than, say, the polymer or metal counterparts. But they've been used on Main Street forever. I mean, the original signs in Europe and colonial days, of course, were made out of wood, but those wood parts were usually painted, and that gave them much more durability and resistance to weathering. And so today, there are many alternative materials that we construct signs out of, and we don't have to automatically go to wood signs. And then this note about unpainted or clear finish wood signs. They usually have major issues with durability. And there's kind of a trend right now to do a lot of wood back signs. I kind of attribute it to the Chip and Joanna Gaines Magnolia Home effect. Um, but the problem is they just don't hold up over the long term. And especially if they're not painted, if they're clear finish, the sun and the rain weather these signs really quickly. So be cautious about those signs on your main street. Plastic signs have limited use on Main Street. The upper left shows a vacuum form plastic sign, also known as a box sign. That backlit plastic is usually lit with fluorescent, um, and today it would be lit with LED, but those types of signs really aren't appropriate. The one exception might be if they were a historic sign, a business that had been there for 60 years or something. um, then we have to kind of consider those on a case by case basis. But also, when we're talking about plastic signs, avoid the cheap rounded vacuum formed letters like the upper right. Those really aren't appropriate for Main Street signs. But higher quality individual plastic letters, like we see on the lower right, those would be appropriate for Main Street signs. These are usually injection molded instead of blow formed, and they're also sometimes cut from a sheet of acrylic, especially if it's a script, kind of like the one you see. Sometimes they'll be cut with a CNC machine out of sheet acrylic. So those are kind of the exceptions for plastic signs that we want to avoid on Main Street. Sometimes you'll come across a case where a business really just doesn't have a budget to improve a sign, and that's backlit plastic sign is already on Main Street. Examples on the left would be something we'd want to avoid, where it's basically that white translucent sheet of plexiglass. That's sometimes called a lens, with black lettering or colored lettering. Those we'd still want to avoid. But a little kind of Main Street cheat that's been used over the years is to actually do a sign like the one on the right, where the predominant background of the sign is black and then light only goes through where the white letters are or colored border around the sign. So that's just a Main Street hack that sometimes we can use to get away with using those backlit plastic signs. Another thing that we always tell people is basically take a look at old photos of your building if you have them, and look at where the signage was originally placed on the building. This is a good example. On the left there, you can see the sign above the storefront cornice and below the windows. So that tells us exactly where the builders or designers of the building were thinking the signage should go on that building. Visualize how your sign will look in relationship to the entire facade. A lot of times we'll see signs that are just simply overscaled for the size of the building and the storefront. This would be an example of that. I happen to like the channel letters, although they're kind of difficult to read, so they don't get extra points for those channel letters. But remember, the sign should not dominate the facade, and its shape and proportion should fit the building. Sometimes you'll see a sign, it's just like this little square in an area that's, the entire width of the building. A sign hung under the storefront cornice also presents a strong image. Decide where you want the sign. The sign on the right is, it's actually about three or four signs, but really conveys a great message of the business. So they have the blade sign, so pedestrians who are coming from a distance can see that blade sign. A blade sign is a sign that projects perpendicular from the facade. So that's that circular sign there with the insomnia cookies. The awning signs, the lettering is appropriately placed on the valance. That's the vertical part of the sign. It's appropriately scaled. And then they have a window sign for when you walk up or pull up in your car right to the building, and we can't see it, but there's also sign with the hours and a logo on the front door of this particular combination. But it's just painted vinyl on glass for the window signs. As we mentioned, the blade sign, the valance on the canopy. Other places that might be appropriate is on the canopy or fascia of the canopy. Remember, the point we're making here is that 2 or 3 signs may even be a necessity on your business, and they kind of should be thought about as a package together, not just separately. But that kind of leads us to the next question. Is it possible to have too many signs? And the answer is yes. And I never like to pick on our Main Street communities, but this is all kind of done to educate people. This sign in one of our Main Street communities basically breaks all the rules. It's got 6 different outdoor signs and then another 14 window signs in the storefront windows, including a clock and a flashing LED light. Of course, the flashing LED light would not really be appropriate for a Main Street building. It does vacuum form letters. It does backlit plastic. It also appears that the canopy is backlit, which I can say that because I can see the mercury switch on the upper left corner of the photo. Also, this is an example where they're putting a logo on the slope surface of the awning. We'll talk a little more about that, how usually that's not a favored location to put signage on a building. Here's an example of, decide how much you want your sign to say and keep your sign short and simple. Remember, it's going to be viewed as a part of a complex environment. So sometimes kind of minimalism is appropriate. I have no problems telling that that's a flower shop because of their good storefronts, but Cameron's just a very simple sign on an canvas awning. A very good example of just how simplicity can kind of say more than a lot of words. Now, we suggest you step back and look at the color of your building. What's the brick color? What's going on in the surrounding structures? And then choose a simple color scheme. And typically, we'd say 2 or 3 colors in a sign. And that's just to keep it from getting overly complex. And then also avoid garish day glow colors like fluorescent pink or fluorescent green. Those colors usually are not appropriate for your Main Street buildings. And as with colors, lighting is important. Lighting sources should always be inconspicuous. We say no glare bombs, meaning, we're not looking directly into the light source when we're looking at the facade of the building. Backlighting individual letters or a silhouetted sign is appropriate. So I don't want to say that backlighting is completely bad, but backlighting plastic is usually not our preferred solution. But doing silhouettes or halos around letters is an appropriate technique on Main Street. Is there just enough ambient lighting sufficient around the building that you don't need to light your sign? Perhaps there's an old-fashioned street light right in front of your building, so maybe you don't need to light it. If you are going to light them externally, we recommend light fixtures similar to the one in the upper right, where they have shades, again, so you're not looking directly at the light source when you're looking at the building. If you are going to do backlighting, lighting individual letters like the Sprint sign is acceptable, but still not the preferred solution on Main Street. So we give that sort of a yield sign. Just looking at other ways that signs can be lit, you can do neon, which is appropriate on Main Street, but check your local ordinances. Arcade lighting, like the letters on the right, are also appropriate. It's just the 2 bottom ones with the backlit white plastic. Those are signs that really aren't appropriate on Main Street. Express your business personality with the typeface or font style that you select. It's amazing how many different thousands of typefaces there are out there, but they all fall into kind of three categories: serif, which is your more elaborate letters; sans serif, which would be like your Helvetica or Calibri or Arial; and then script letters. Within those three categories, there are just thousands of choices, and we just recommend that you pick something that expresses the character of your business. If it's a fun candy store, maybe a script font is appropriate. So just keep that in mind when you're branding with your sign. Quality of workmanship and construction is also very important. Keep it simple and not overly complex, but keep it well made. And basically, the best way to ensure that it is well made is find a reputable sign maker. Don't just go to, my friend's cousin who's an artist and he's going to paint something on a sheet of metal and we're going to throw it up there. I've even seen signs that on our main streets literally looks like somebody blew up their business card and had it printed on a, 4 foot wide piece of sheet metal. That's not an appropriate sign for a main street building. The dead giveaway was that the size of the telephone number was equal to the size of the name of the business. So, make sure you're keeping your message on point. And then when you're using a sign contractor, always ask to see examples of their work. Signs provided by national distributors are not appropriate usually on Main Street. They don't reflect your individuality. They usually appear as add-ons and they don't reflect the personal business message. I've done a whole essay, I only have including a few, but State Farm signs around our state and a few others. The State Farm sign on the left here, Sam Meyer, I mean, that's an appropriate Main Street blade sign. It's not using a big corporate identity, but it's a perfect sign for Main Street. The one on the right is actually in Wamego, Kansas. And I love that they're using the corporate logo, but they're not using, just the regular backlit individual letters. They've included the, lighting into the design, which you can see below the sign. Just a great example of an appropriate Main Street sign, both of those. Backlit plastic letters on the left. Again, we give that a yield sign. It's not banned from Main Street, but it's not the preferred solution. And of course, the sign on the far right would also not be an appropriate Main Street sign. Then we get to things like obtaining appropriate permits and permission for signage. Always check your local city and district sign ordinances, apply for the permits, whatever the governing body is. And also, if your building is on the National Register, you do need to get SHPO approval for that sign, or at least your certified local government if they have those approval rights locally. So that's very important. Always ask before you do a neon sign if it's even allowed in your local sign ordinance. Many communities in Kansas have actually banned neon signs. Also, be sure they haven't banned backlit plastic signs. If you happen to be reusing one, you might not be meeting their new sign ordinance. So, also a quick word about awnings here because those are often tied to sign packages. An awning or canopy can create a pleasant space in front of your building. They are decorative, but they also should be very functional. This was a building I was actually in before. It was in about February, and the light that was coming in those transom prisms was just almost unbearable. You think of that being more of a problem in the summertime, but because of the low sun, they really needed this awning. Awnings and canopies can regulate the amount of sunlight that comes in your windows. South-facing storefronts benefit the most. East and west storefronts will benefit for a half a day, but sometimes even north facing storefronts do benefit from shading, do not benefit from shading, but can be improved aesthetically by adding the awning. It's just a good way to improve the overall appearance of the facade. And it'll still protect you from rain when you're coming in and out of the building. Only arched windows or entrances should have these round top type awnings like this. We call them bubble awnings, and they're not a preferred solution on Main Street. Definitely should not be used unless it's an arched window. Also, this is a backlit awning, which is not recommended on Main Street as well. And if it's a rectangular window opening, we'd prefer an angled or sloped awning to be on that situation. This is actually on an architect's office, and I mentioned it to the architect, and they said, "Oh, they pulled out a rendering of what they were trying to get their landlord to change these awnings to." So an awning or canopy can add character and interest to your storefront. Consider the scale of the awning or canopy. This is an example of an awning that's actually pretty significantly overscaled for the building. I like to say it's an awning with a building attached instead of vice versa. Consider the relationship to the architectural features. If you notice, there's two piers on that building, and that awning really should have stopped where the piers started. A good rule of thumb is to only put the awning over where there's glass in the facade. And so where these piers are, they really shouldn't have had the awning. Also, sometimes starting and stopping the awning. So maybe if this was three awnings, it would have been, would have appeared more appropriate. Consider the proportions, consider the relationship to the neighboring buildings. It almost overpowers the neighboring buildings as well as its own building. And then just consider the character of the surrounding streetscape. Now, all of that said, I will say the one reason this building, its awning is so large is because it was covering up a kind of ugly canopy that was sticking out. And so they tried to kind of take the curse off the canopy, but they might have actually made it worse because it was a canopy that looked about like the one on the right. Canopies are usually constructed from metal wood. Many horizontal canopies, like this one in this picture, use chains or tension rods for support. Cantilevered canopies are a thing, and they're designed to require no extra support. But just a word of caution, if you're going to do a cantilevered canopy, be sure to get a structural engineer involved because, like awnings, these things can be pretty big wind sails, and Kansas winds have been known to rip both canopies and awnings off of buildings. So make sure you get your system just evaluated by a structural engineer. Consider the entire building when choosing color for your awning. This is a more decorative facade on both of these two buildings, so they went with a simpler sort of solid color awning because of the complexity of the rest of the building in both of these. But here are two really, simple Main Street buildings, and they actually benefit from the added interest of a pattern or a stripe. And so just keep that in mind when selecting materials. Awnings and canopies have long been used to display names of the businesses. The one on the left is a good example of where they just put the name of the business on the valance of the awning. The one on the right is not so great example. Number one, oftentimes when the message is put on that slope portion of the awning, it's overscaled, and this is an example of that. It's also sometimes done as a cheat to kind of beat sign ordinances. The general rule of thumb is we don't want to see large lettering or messages or logos on that slope portion of the awning. And if you think about if you're really driving by, I mean, in this photo, I'm standing across the street, but if you're in a car that's not, a lifted truck or something, most of that message is actually pointing skyward as you're driving by. I like to say keep your message appropriately scaled to be read at 25 miles per hour, not billboard size, and to be read at 65 miles per hour. So that's often why, local ordinances will prohibit people putting messages on the sloped portion of the awning. So awnings and canopies, they're not a solution for every storefront design, but if well-designed and properly placed, they can save you money, basically on your energy bills. They can spruce up your storefront. This is an example of a north-facing building and they went all out with the awnings, even though those windows probably never see any sunlight. But they can create a pleasant and shaded and dry sidewalk for your shoppers. So just keep that in mind. Here, we're just going to switch to looking at some signs that I really like across Kansas main streets. This is the Free State cigar business. Really nice blade sign. And then the sign on the window is literally the same size, same graphic. They've got a great logo. It's actually the foil band on their local brand of cigars just blown up. But great example of using two different kinds of signs for your business as well. Oz Winery in Wamego, Kansas. Love the imagery of the sign. It is backlit individual letters, but it's done in a very three-dimensional way. That's always a positive when we can make these signs a little more three-dimensional and interesting. Good example of a logo as a sign. Neon, I always love good neon. This neon in Hayes, Kansas on the Fox Theater has been well maintained. In fact, all the lighting on this kind of contributes to the overall effect of this kind of art moderne building. But they have combined it with some newer marquee kind of lighting. So I think this is really well done. Waukene, Kansas, their little North Pole area on their main street. I just love the sort of folk art. I'm sure that sign has been there for a very long time, but a great example of a good sign on Main Street. And then here's another neon. I always like classic Rexall signs, and especially if I find one that's still lit, like this one, Cooper Drugs in Augusta, Kansas. So now consider this idea: your entire building conveys an image that acts as a sign. Your building appearance is more subtle than a word symbol or a number sign, but it can be more effective. Your building is your brand. So what do your buildings say about your main street? Are they conveying the message that you really want to see on your main street? I mentioned the keeping up appearances. This is what that document looks like. It's kind of a graphic novel for Main Street design. We also have available the Main Street America design handbook. That's the old one in the center. I still like that one because it has a lot of stuff about our design committees. So I still recommend people use that. And then the updated design handbook on the right is also available. And just as always, a reminder about the design services that Kansas Main Street provides. I'm happy to help our designated communities with design services. Those services could be anything from streetscape design, storefront rehabs, design visualization, upper floor reuse, slipcover removal, preservation issues, and of course, signage and color consultation. So with that, I'll put up our contact information here. Feel free, if you have a project, to reach out to me by phone or by email, but we do have in the newsletter every month, basically a link that you can go and apply for design services, which now, even if you call me, I'm going to ask you to go and fill out that short kind of questions and answers and place to upload photos and things, because we're basically requiring that now for design services. So with that, I will turn it back over to you.
Any questions, comments, thoughts?
I would just add that anytime we have a new business coming downtown, they always have to go before our design review board. And then I can, I'm always there to represent downtown, but rarely do we have any, does our office have any real weight with what is approved to go up in downtown? But I do neon, you're right, Robert, we aren't allowed any neon unless it's grandfathered in.
And you do have some good neon signs in Salina.
Any other questions, comments?
Oh yeah, I asked it in the chat. I don't know if it got seen. I was hoping to get a
Oh.
copy of this presentation because I unfortunately missed the first half of it. And this is wonderful stuff that I want to introduce to our other planners.
Yeah, I think this whole Zoom has been recorded, Randy, but I can get you a copy of the presentation as well. But it might be actually more useful to do the recording.
Yeah, and
Thank you.
you might look for this in our next newsletter. That's probably where we'll put the document. So
Did you cover murals on the side of brick buildings at all? Because I saw a few painted brick buildings in your presentation, and I've been writing a paper on it recently.
I did not cover that in this presentation, but as you're aware, I have a whole
Yeah.
presentation on why not to paint your building, and happy to share that.
All right. Thank you.
Can I
Yes.
ask your advice on getting ordinances changed in your city or getting them upheld? I'm from Sterling.
Yes, we have actually done that for a couple of communities who have, we've worked with them to develop a sign ordinance basically, and we're happy to look at what you have and make suggestions for what might need to be added to it.
Okay, do I send that to you then? Do that one-on-one?
Yeah, we can start just by an email. Send me whatever you have on it right now.
Okay, thank you.
any other questions, comments? With that, I think we'll wrap things up. Thanks for being here today. Great job, Robert, as always. And we'll see you all Thursday at 10 a.m. at the next quarterly training. Take care, everybody.